Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for clicking on my channel. This is the second part of the chapter 12 of Andrew Morton's The Queen book, and the chapter is particularly about Princess Diana's death and the royal family's reaction, obviously what was going on at the time. This is the second part of the video, so if you haven't yet watched, go over to my channel and watch the first part of this video, because it's quite a long chapter. I mean, it's not really that long, but it's long for me in terms of doing a video. So this video is two parts, and obviously if I can get it done, then it'll be 2 parts, or it might be 3. But go over and obviously check out video number 1, or part 1, and then this is part 2. If you are joining me for part 2, thank you so much for joining me. For those of you who are new to this channel, please do subscribe, press the like button and comment on this video, because that will help my video grow. It's something to do with the algorithm, so it will help my channel grow. And please do share this video if you find it interesting. Where we left off in the previous video was that Diana's death had been announced to the royal family, and they're talking about funeral arrangements with the Spencers, who's Diana's family before marriage, obviously. And Diana's plane has just arrived in the UK, and we're starting to see the UK's public reaction to Diana's death. So I'm continuing in this chapter. So there's obviously the outpouring of grief that we all know that took over the British public, and also obviously the world, and that took the royal family by surprise. Princess Margaret's chauffeur, David Griffin, he was at Kensington Palace, and he was discussing what had happened with a duty police inspector. And according to Griffin, he anticipated that there was just going to be a handful of flowers from a few well-wishers, but he didn't appreciate, obviously, what was going on in the global psyche. So by late Sunday afternoon, so in the morning, he was having this discussion on Sunday, and then by Sunday late afternoon, Kensington Palace was a floating moat of cellophane-wrapped floral tributes, poems, pictures, and lighted candles. And as Archbishop Carey predicted, the contrasting iconography of Diana and the royal family came into play. The perceived warmth, accessibility, and normality of the princess conflicting with the cold, indifferent, and aloof House of Windsor, whose members used duty and tradition as a shield. So then obviously we have the next few days where there was just an influx of flowers and tributes to the princess. It talks about how, people who didn't even know the princess were mourning so much so that it was almost like a member of their own family, or they were mourning, in fact, more than a member of their family. They were hugging strangers and so forth. And in the first part of this video, I talked about the church service in Scotland that the Queen attended, and members of the royal family. And that there wasn't any mention of Diana at that service, and that was because Harry and William were there, and obviously the priest didn't want to upset them, but it was taken as very cold. So this had jarred the public. Resentment was beginning to build as the palace seemed more interested in maintaining protocol than supporting the needs of the people. Now, I think that's really unfair, because obviously the Queen, has lost her daughter-in-law, and she does have a son to think about, and she does have her grandchildren, most importantly, to think about. So I think people needed to take a step back, which is what I said in my first video, and they needed to kind of pause for a moment and show some compassion. At the end of the day, yes, she needed to be there for the people, but the people, Diana ain't your mum, Diana ain't your friend. You didn't know Diana, you didn't meet Diana. Do you get what I'm saying? Yes, okay, but let's not be selfish and be like, Queen, you need to be there for me because I'm grieving, when it's like, in reality, that's Diana's family and they're grieving. So can we pause for a moment, and then the Queen will be here. Any leader, any person in any job, in any profession, they are given some time to grieve. So I think that she should have been given a lot more compassion than that she was given. At first, the police would not allow the public to place bouquets outside the royal palaces, while those wishing to pay tribute were having to wait up to 12 hours to sign a book of condolence. And then obviously there was the flagpole issue at Buckingham Palace. It was naked. Traditionally, only the royal standard is flown, and then only when the sovereign is in residence. It soon became a focal point, the absence of a raised flag or one flying at half-mast, seen as a royal family indifference and invisible. Britain's monarchy seemed to be retreating from the nation rather than leading the nation in mourning. See, I think that's so unfair because it's a member of their own family. So give them a moment. People wanted to see the Queen as unifying and consoling rather than watching from the wings. The Sun was typically blunt, so the Sun newspaper. Where is the Queen when the country needs her? She is 550 miles from London, the focal point of the nation's grief. There was a bitter irony in this criticism of the monarch. And actually, what I'm about to read, I'd actually said this in the first video. In the past, she had been accused of putting duty above motherhood, particularly during the childhoods of Prince Charles and Princess Anne. Now she was being attacked for placing her compassion and concern for her grandchildren above her obligation to the nation. And I mean, that's exactly it, isn't it? She can never win. I don't think anybody in any sort of leader role, in any sort of public role, can ever win, unless you're blindly loved and admired. I think that when you make very difficult decisions, there's always going to be someone that's not going to like the decision that you've made. There's always going to be someone that's unhappy. And as I said in my first video, I think she has grown as a maternal figure from when she first became queen to now as a grandmother. And so here she's obviously prioritizing her grandchildren, and obviously one of them is going to be the future king. So, she's putting that first. And frankly, we're talking about a number of days. We're talking about a couple of days. So you couldn't even give her that. To think of what the Queen has given this country in terms of her life, her duty, her whole life was given to us, and we couldn't even give her a couple of days. A couple of days just to digest what has happened. Behind closed doors, as you can see from the first video, there's so many discussions and so many people involved and so many decisions she had to make and discussions that had to be made. So there's that going on. And then there's also obviously the two boys. And then there's obviously, her son in grief. And then there's obviously the public. And then there's obviously the Prime Minister. I mean, for God's sake, give her a couple of days. At Balmoral, Her Majesty's priority was to keep the boys occupied, just as she had done in 1979 when she showed Timothy Snatchball unstoppable mothering as he recovered from the Mountbatten assassination. Prince Philip was a constant presence, reassuring and consoling. He set the boys to work, preparing food for the barbecue picnics. Princess Anne took Harry out exploring in Balmoral wildlife, while Peter and Zara Phillips and the boys went quad biking, horse riding, fishing and shooting. I mean, how lovely to be able to have that kind of privilege. And unfortunately, Harry seems to not really recognise how his family were there for him and there for his brother at this very tragic time. And that he was, yes, he faced such a profound tragedy and grief, but at the same time, he had such profound privilege, which a lot of people in his situation who has suffered of the death of a parent as a young child does not have. So you'd think he could be a bit more humble and a bit more compassionate, but unfortunately he's thrown his family down the river. In between endless meetings, their father brought out the old family albums to take them on a trip down memory lane. Harry also took solace in the arms of Tiggy, the woman who's known to call Harry and William and Harry my baby. So Tiggy was the nanny, as my understanding. So during the fateful week, William and Harry valiantly tried to absorb their family's fortitude and stoicism. I kept saying to myself that, my mother would not want me to be upset, William revealed years later. She'd not want me to be down. She'd want me to be like this. I kept myself busy as well, which is good and bad sometimes, but allows you to kind of get through the initial shock phase. So that was obviously William's reaction to Princess Diana's death. Very different to, I think, Harry's reaction to, or the way in which he copes with her death, which we can see as them as adults, obviously, in what Harry talks about and how Harry talks about the death of his mother. We can see that him and William have reacted very differently. If they had returned to Kensington Palace, they would have been kicking their heels and listening to the wailing and keening outside of the gates, which is true because so many people were wailing and crying. Thankfully, we had the privacy to mourn and collect our thoughts, and to have that space away from everybody, William later recalled. So that's what William says, is that he was so thankful for that privacy at that time to mourn and collect his thoughts and have space from everybody. Now, that is very key when you think about the decision that the Queen made to keep the family up in Balmoral. You know, William, as an adult, is now very thankful for that time. And that's obviously helped him, at least. I don't know about Harry, but it's at least helped him in terms of his mental health and his coping and his grief. And, you know, perhaps we now see the fruits of that labor, because he is, it seems, such a well-adjusted adult, despite such a huge tragic loss in his life. William later recalled, "We had no idea the reaction to her death would be quite so huge." And I think that's right, to have kept the boys in Balmoral, for their grandmother to be there, for her to show leadership to her family. I know that obviously, you know, members of the public wanted her to show leadership to the nation, and indeed that's what some of the media was saying. But at the end of the day, at that point, she needed to show leadership to her family, and she did so. And in my view, did so well, because obviously now we have a future leader, a future king, and he recalls that time and is very thankful for that moment. And, you know, so in my view, that was actually good, because if you can imagine the alternative, that they all came down to London to see what they saw, would have been horrific for them so early on. So at least they were given some days to grieve in private. At the business end of planning Diana's funeral, the Queen's management team, together with the officials from the Prime Minister's office in Downing Street and representatives from the Spencer family, had worked into the early hours of Monday morning to come up with a proposal tailored to remember and celebrate a unique human being. So you have Her Majesty's senior officials outlined what they thought was appropriate to commemorate Diana's life. And because there was no precedent for this type of situation, the idea was to create a funeral that neatly meshed the ancient and modern with the traditional and innovative. Diana's coffin would be pulled on a horse-drawn gun carriage with 12 pallbearers from the Welsh Guards would accompany it. The standard military procession would be replaced by 500 workers from the princess's charities. And to be honest, whoever did come up with the plans for her funeral did quite a good job, I think. I don't know if it's a funeral that she necessarily would have wanted, but it definitely was a funeral I think the public wanted.
And perhaps the one that she deserved. Lord Arley argued it was important to bring a cross-section of the public not normally invited to the Abbey, the people Diana associated with. I think that was probably a really good call. And it's what she would have wanted, right? Everyone nervously awaited the sovereign's verdict. Thankfully, she agreed to the proposals and made it clear that the royal family were not detached from this major event. Now, I'm not surprised that she gave her permission. I mean, when does she ever say no? You know, from what I read and hear, she generally says yes to most things unless the government advise her against it. She was very happy with the charity workers, courtier Malcolm Ross recalled. Blair's press secretary, Alistair Campbell, was impressed by the Queen's flexibility, creativity, and even risk-taking, hardly words usually associated with the head of state. And I think it's really unfair that that stuff didn't make its way to the press, because the press at the time was very negative against the Queen and the royal family, although Harry will make you believe that they're in cahoots, when that would seem contradictory to all the negative press that you see on members of the royal family. So that time that Princess Diana had her funeral, or at the time when she died, I should say, the direct aftermath, there was really negative press on the Queen in particular and the royal family. And so I think it's quite harsh that these positivities were not reflected. However, there were some elements that she refused to move on. Well, I spoke too soon. In particular, her family's wish to grieve privately in Scotland. Okay, that I do not criticise her for. I think that at the end of the day, she's a human being. their family is a human being and children are involved, as I've said in my previous video, and she should be given the opportunity to allow her family to grieve in private. And frankly, whatever mental health is left, I think was preserved because of her decision for them to be able to grieve in private, particularly Harriet and William. She also objected to Earl Spencer's demand that Diana be buried at Althorpe rather than Frogmore. Is that the right? I mean, Frogmore is on the Windsor estate. If you remember, the Duke of Windsor, who was the Queen's uncle who abdicated, who was married to Wallis Simpson, I believe that he and also Wallis Simpson, the Duchess of Windsor, were buried at Frogmore. So I can see that, you know, you don't necessarily have to be a working member of the royal family, but you are royal. I can see that you can still be buried on the Windsor estate. But I think it was right that her body was given to the Spencers and given to be buried at Althorpe, which was Diana's family home. Family meaning the Spencer family. Because she was divorced from the family, she is a Spencer, and Althorpe is the family estate. And I think what her brother has done by giving her her own private island, where literally no one from the public can access her grave, I think is nice. And he's done tributes to her. You know, he's got a memorial and so forth at the home. And so I think that was the right decision, that her body be given to the Spencers. The spikiness between the House of Spencer and Windsor continued throughout the week, as Archbishop Carey recalled. I had sent a first draft of the prayers I proposed to read at the service to the Dean of Westminster for comments from those directly involved. I was taken aback when the reaction revealed intense bitterness. It was reported to me that the Spencer family did not want any mention of the royal family in the prayers, and in retaliation, Buckingham Palace had insisted that they must have a separate prayer for the royal family, and that the words "People's Princess" be removed. While I was saddened by this, I considered it essential to get the prayers right for everyone's sake. It was a time of exceptional bewilderment, and the strain was affecting everybody. I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? It was such an emotive time, and the time was so, this often happens after people die, right? Where you're organising the funeral, everything is quick, the decisions need to be made fast. You might regret things later. The grief is sort of paused, the not wanting to let go, not wanting to say goodbye, anger, bitterness, grief, it's all there. And so I'm not surprised there was this argument. It's a bit petty, to be honest. I can understand why they wouldn't want People's Princess, because it is a sort of rivalry to the family, isn't it? And they have a constitutional role, like, I get it. And I don't understand the prayers for the royal family. Is it a separate prayer, like praying for the wellness of the royal family? I mean, if it was just sort of separate, I can see why the Spencers wouldn't want that there, because it seems a bit odd. But if it's just including them in terms of a reference within the prayers, like, for example, the royal family, pray for her soul or something like that and are thankful for her life, then I would seem a bit harsh for them not to be included. But if it's a separate prayer to sort of pray for all the members of the royal family, I can see why Earl Spencer, or at least the House of Spencer, would be a bit annoyed by that. The Archbishop was also concerned that Earl Spencer had been invited to give the address when traditionally only members of the clergy preached at funeral services. I wonder who he was invited by, because if he was invited by the royal family, I think that was quite a nice gesture. I mean, it's his big sister after all, and he represents the Spencer family, and the speech that he gave was so iconic. And when you sort of listen to it back, people believed at the time, and I remember believing at the time, that he was very scorned and he was very bitter against the royal family, and he was sort of, going for them, and this speech was being bitter for them, talking about blood family, Harry and William's blood family. I mean, the royal family are their blood family, obviously, their father's side. But I've heard Earl Spencer talk about that time, and I've heard him say, hang on a second, I am faithful to the royal family. I'm an Earl after all, right? He's a part of the aristocracy, he's an Earl, he has a title, He is the Queen's representative. He is a part of the aristocracy. His family have served the royal family for like 700 years or something. And what he was saying is that his speech wasn't meant to be a dig at the royal family, that I think it was more of a dig at the press or the people that had hounded Diana. So it was quite interesting that he was like, hang on a second, that's not what I meant, even though the public took it to mean, you know, he was sort of digging at them. Though he contacted Diana's brother and urged him to bring out the Christian message of hope and life evermore in God, he got the impression that the Earl had other ideas of what he wanted to say. There was another, and actually, I think there is a documentary you can find on Althorp or on Earl Spencer. He has a painting of Princess Diana in the hallway, like the main sort of hallway, the main staircase, of Althorp. And next to it, he has his own, I think, either a picture or a painting of himself. And he is holding the speech that he gave at Princess Diana's funeral. And so his picture is alongside Diana. I think in the middle there might be a clock or something. And he's holding the speech. And he says in that documentary that I think he was sort of up all night or something and just started writing the speech and literally just wrote it in one go. And that was it. So he wrote it quite quickly and wrote it in one go, and it just became so iconic. I mean, it was beautiful. The way he spoke, he was so eloquent, so articulate. I wish I could speak like that. And the stuff he came up with, I mean, if he wasn't on Chat GPT or some AI or, plagiarized any of this, the stuff that he came out and wrote is just so eloquent, so well put together and worded to express his feelings so well. I think he did his sister such justice. I think she would have loved that speech, particularly when he said, the irony is that a woman called Diana means in Greek or something, the hounded or hunted, that she herself had been hunted. And she also, when he said that she was taken at her prime, the most beautiful, it was just, it was very touching. So there was another conflict brewing which had potential to be far more damaging than Windsor versus Spencer. Oh God. Namely the disagreement between Prince Charles's advisors based at St. James's Palace and those of Her Majesty at Buckingham Palace. I remember hearing a lot about this. In the early stages, the Prince's spin doctors attempted to portray Charles as decisive and democratic, while all the Queen's men were dithering, delaying, and hiding behind precedent and tradition. In their misleading narrative, that's interesting, the sovereign was depicted as having been initially opposed to the use of an aircraft of the Queen's flight to bring Diana's body home, much of the alleged frustration of her advisors. Indeed, her deputy private secretary, Robin Janvrin, is said to have asked the Queen, "What would you rather, ma'am, that she come back in a Harrods van?" The department store Harrods was owned by Mr. Alfayed. Journalists were briefed that the Prince of Wales had decisively countermanded the original decision for Diana to remain in a public mortuary in Fulham, West London. Oh God, that would have been a bit weird. Instead, according to his aide, he had ordered that the princess should rest in the Chapel Royal, which I think is a better decision. It seemed that during this traumatic time, certain courtiers allied with Charles were playing an unpleasant game of one-upmanship. So that's not really nice that the courtiers seem to be playing games behind the scenes. For what purpose? For what purpose? They're making the Queen seem bad, they're making Charles seem good. Is it because Charles would have had a bigger fallout from this than the Queen? The Queen's got a more established and admired reputation than Charles, and now the death of Diana, Charles would have gone down like a sinking ship, and he's obviously the future of the monarchy, so they need to save him rather than the Queen, and she's the sort of scapegoat because her reputation is so solid, she can afford a little bit of a nudge here and there. Or is there some sort of other agenda between the courtiers and between the teams? It seems a bit nasty. In reality, so here we are. So this is the truth, according to Andrew Morton. In reality, both the Queen and her private secretary, Sir Robert Fellows, had agreed from the beginning that a plane should be sent to Paris to carry her back to the UK, and that she should lie in state at the Chapel Royal, and there should be a full ceremonial funeral. So if you remember, it was the Spencers who wanted a small private funeral and then a public memorial. But the Queen, from the beginning, it seems, wanted a full-scale ceremony, a full-scale funeral. From the beginning, she said that Diana should have been placed at Chapel Royal. And from the beginning, she said that the plane should be used to bring her body back. So even when we have in the movie The Queen, the portrayal that the Queen was like, oh no, we can't use that plane, oh no, oh no. And then you have the Queen Mother going, oh Charles, you can use my plane. They keep it on standby in case I kick the bucket or whatever, in case she passes away. And the Queen's like, oh no, no, oh, she's not a member of the royal family, oh no, no, no. She's not a HRH. Like, that actually, according to Andrew Morton, is not true. From the beginning, the Queen was like, absolutely. Now, I think it's so unfair how the Queen was portrayed, and is portrayed, even in The Crown. Because from what I've read, the Queen loved Princess Diana, and the Duke of Edinburgh loved Princess Diana. They hated Charles having an affair. They, the Queen did not approve of Charles getting married to Camilla, did not approve of them getting divorced. She is the head of the Church of England. She was very religious. She loved Princess Diana. She thought she was a great match to be Queen, a great match for Charles. And the Duke of Edinburgh, allegedly, or well, it's not alleged, but there were letters that were uncovered between him and Diana where he was trying to support her and trying to say, I have no idea why Charles would choose Camilla over you. We honestly have no clue, meaning him and the Queen. And then after Diana died, and obviously Charles was like, look, Camilla's a non-negotiable, I want to marry her, blah, blah, blah. There's so much talk, back in the day, I'm not talking about now or recent times, but back in those days, that the Queen, I think the Duke of Edinburgh didn't want to be in a room with Camilla. I think the Queen didn't want to be seen with her, didn't want to attend the holy part of their wedding or whatever, or the civil registry or whatever, and only attended another part. There's all these sort of rumours, as it were. So I don't think it's as clear-cut as what the Crown might represent and what other people might represent by saying that, oh, the Queen was so cold to Diana and sided with Charles, and it was the royal family all on one side and then Diana on the other side, and, no. An official who was present during that week recalled, one of the most dangerous things which took place during those fraught days was that the two palaces were totally at odds with each other. In short, those in Charles's camp were prepared to throw anyone under the bus to protect their man, and that included the Queen and other members of the royal family. This conflict would continue long after Diana's burial. Well, there we go. And that's not a mistake. It's not Charles as the man. It's not the Queen as the man. But it says here, the team. So it says here, Charles's camp to protect their man. So it's the people that work for you, right? So if I'm top dog, I'm someone important, I'm significant, and I've got a team, and they're running out there, running their mouth and doing what they've got to do to secure that my reputation and my work is secure, that's not necessarily an order coming from the top, is it? It's not an order coming from me. I'm not approving of their behaviour. As well as the flags flying, or lack of it, at Buckingham Palace, the issue of the boys walking behind the funeral cortege was the most contentious. Earl Spencer said that he should be the only one to do this, while representatives of the royal family pointed out that traditionally all the close male relatives would accompany the coffin. That's really interesting, because it says all the close male relatives. Now, if you think back to the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, Princess Anne walked behind her father's coffin, didn't she? Including, obviously, all the other male members of the royal family, but Princess Anne did. And I think that the Queen, Princess Anne, other members of the royal family are not given enough credit for how feminist they were and how pioneering they were for women's roles and women's rights and positions. So, I think they are not given as, you got Meghan Markle joining the royal family. Everyone's like, oh my god, women empowerment, feminist, she's all about women's rights. But it's like, hang on a second. The Queen is one of the oldest leaders, one of the longest reigning leaders who is about feminism. She's a bloody woman herself. Like, come on now. And Princess Anne, she's done, if you know about Princess Anne, you know about her history, there is so much in her that you would be proud as a woman, that she has done and she has stood for, including, for example, wearing trousers and wearing this military uniform. I think it was the Queen's funeral. She was walking behind the coffin with her brothers, and she was donning, a trouser military suit. And I think she's the first female to ever do this in history. One, to wear that outfit, but two, to walk behind the Queen's funeral, behind the Queen's coffin. You know, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's right. This tussle was not resolved until the evening of the funeral. The boys became something of a shuttlecock between different parties. As one Downing Street aide revealed, there was one amazing moment when we were on speaker with who we thought was Janvrin alone, and Prince Philip came booming over the squeak box. The Spencer side had been saying what the role of the children had to be, and Philip suddenly blasted, "Stop telling us what to do with those boys. You're talking about them as if they were commodities. Have you any idea what they are going through?" It was rather wonderful. His voice was full of emotion, a real voice of the grandfather speaking. I wonder what the Spencers were saying, though, because the Spencers were saying, it says here, the Spencers were saying what the role of the boys should be. And it's interesting that it was the Duke of Edinburgh that was like, excuse me, leave these boys alone, they're going through hell. During another conference call later in the week, the Duke once again made another impromptu contribution. Our worry at the moment is William. He's run away up the hill and we can't find him. That's the only thing we are concerned about at the moment. Wow, that's interesting. So William, at the time, had reacted quite strongly, and he had run away. So obviously, I think at this time they're still in Balmoral. I may be wrong, but I think they're still in Balmoral. And obviously, the Balmoral estate is huge, vast, very rural, very secluded and isolated. So, you know, it's not that he sort of ran out of the front door and ran over to like another part of the city and they can't find him and they got the police out. No, he's probably in the same estate. He's just, you know those moments. We've all been through them where your hysteria, your grief is so great that you literally just need to run. You're running. It's almost like running away from the pain, running away from the problem. You're running. You could run. It's the Forrest Gump moment, isn't it? The Forrest Gump moment where he just literally runs halfway across the world or whatever, and he's just running. You're just running away from your emotions, and then to find somewhere that is secluded and isolated so that you can just be in pain and be in your pain. So it's also very sweet that the Duke of Edinburgh, on a conference call with, it seems, maybe the Spencers, but it definitely will be the government, was like, we don't give a shit, basically, about what's going on. This is what we're worried about. We're worried about William right now. Go away, kind of thing. So, again, a move away from this stereotype that the royal family is all about tradition and protocol and stiff upper lip and duty and get on with it. How Meghan Markle might make you feel. Like, no, actually, they were all about family at this point. They were all about being grandparents, being protectors, being mother bears and father bears of these two little boys. 20 years later, William tried to explain his confused feelings during that difficult time. There's nothing like it in the world. There really isn't. It's like an earthquake has just run through the house and through your life and everything. Your mind is completely split, and it took me a while for it to actually sink in. During this time, he found consolation from his grandmother, who, as he described later, understood some of the more complex issues when you lose a loved one. How beautiful is that? She's a human being. She is a real grandmother. And she has gone through so much in her life, so much loss and so much grief. And she was really there for these boys. You don't hear this from Prince Harry, but she was really there for these boys. And I imagine that if Meghan had opened up to her, you hear from the Recollections May Vary statement where the Queen says, now we know the full extent, or whilst we didn't know the full extent of their troubles, or something like that. So I think if she knew about it, and if Harry had come to her and Meghan had come to her, then she probably would have been able to help, and things probably would have been different. And I don't want to hear this nonsense, we tried to contact her, but she was busy. I don't want to hear that nonsense, because apparently when you're in California and Canada, allegedly you're saying that you're always in contact with her, you're always FaceTiming, Meghan picks up the phone and, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that the Duke is unwell, Prince Philip is unwell, blah, blah, blah. So if you're able to contact her like that, then surely you can contact her and say, Granny, we're in a crisis, or, Granny, I'm feeling really low in my mental health, but obviously I don't think that happened. So then I think it's really unfair that if it didn't happen and you didn't give the Queen a chance and you didn't give senior members of the royal family a chance, I think it's really unfair to then present them as really cold and they weren't there for you and they weren't supportive and they didn't help you if they didn't know what was going on. And it's not like you lived in Kensington Palace. It's not like you lived in Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. You lived in Frogmore Cottage. You lived in your own separate home. They don't know what's going on in there. So I think it's really unfair. And they've got so much going on. So much going on. Their diaries are full. And then I think it's really unfair for you to turn around and say, no one was there for me, nobody cared for me, nobody asked if I'm okay. I think that's really unfair. As the boys sought solace with their family, and the senior royals and their officials tried to work out a unique funeral for a unique individual, on the streets of London the mood had turned genuinely nasty. And this is the problem, isn't it? Because of this distorted narrative that's hit the press. I mean, if there were truths in there, then the public wouldn't have wasted their energy and been so nasty. You know, and it wouldn't have been, is this the downfall of the royal family, for God's sake? The initial target was the tabloid media for hiring the paparazzi who had apparently chased Diana to her death. Public anger was also directed to the royal family, not only for their slow and muted response to the tragedy, but also their indifference to her during her lifetime. Now, okay, the indifference during the lifetime, okay, fine. We've heard Diana, we haven't heard their side. But in terms of their slow response and their muted response, obviously what I've just covered in this video and in the first video is that there was a lot going on. And I think if people knew what the hell was going on, people wouldn't say slow and muted. What people had in their mind was that, oh, they were just chilling in Balmoral, getting on with their holidays, shooting, fishing, doing their thing, and then they just didn't care. And they were like, what's going on? Okay, who cares? Which wasn't actually the case. With the crowds in London's streets swelling at a rate of 6,000 people an hour, I wonder how they worked that out. But that's a lot, and it was a lot. I saw it; it was incredible. Downing Street officials feared that rioting could break out. Ooh, interesting! I didn't know that. People were standing in line for several hours to sign books of condolence. I remember that. Still, no flag flew from Buckingham Palace. Where was the Queen? Asked mourners in the Mall. Where is our Queen? Chanted the tabloids. Show us you care, they hysterically demanded in 96-point type. Wow, massive. Show us you care, massive. See? But if they knew what was going on. Still, the sovereign refused to budge and return to the capital, of course, because she was caring about her grandchildren. Courtiers tried in vain to convince the Queen and Prince Philip to recognise the increasingly precarious situation and fly back to the nation's capital. Tony Blair, sensing matters were genuinely getting out of hand, called Prince Charles to discuss the worrying state of affairs and made it clear that the tide of public opinion could not be turned back, revisited or ignored. In the end, an alliance of the Prince of Wales, the Prime Minister and every royal advisor came together and over a conference call managed to persuade the Queen of the magnitude of the situation. Once she was convinced that inaction was harmful to the monarchy, everything changed. She agreed to travel back to London a day sooner than planned. A day, you know. A day. So they had planned to come back. Let's get that into our heads. She'd planned to come. But she had to come a day early because it might have meant the end of the monarchy because everyone was so crazy and so angry. How bad is that? So she agreed to travel back to London a day sooner than planned, go for a walkabout outside Buckingham Palace on her return, broadcast to the nation, and for the first time in history allow the Union flag to fly at half-mast at the palace. So she basically agreed to everything, I would suspect. On the final evening of Balmoral, Prince Philip suggested that they should attend the service at Crathy Church the next morning. This time Diana was mentioned in the prayer for the family. On their way back to the castle, the boys were photographed looking at the mound of flowers and reading the notes outside the gates. Okay, so I'd said in my previous video that I think they were photographed that first time that they went to the church, the day that Princess Diana died, and that I thought the boys had been photographed, but actually I think the photographs were this second time that they went to church. In this highly charged atmosphere, the Queen's departure from Scotland and her decision to give her own public tribute to Diana direct from Buckingham Palace, immediately helped to heal the evident dislocation between the monarch and the people. The Prime Minister advised her to show that she was vulnerable. He said, "I really do feel for you. There can be nothing more miserable than feeling as you do and having your motives questioned." That's interesting. So Tony Blair did have sympathy for her. The Prime Minister did have sympathy for her. I wonder why he didn't speak out and be like, look, give the monarch a break, basically, and speak more positively about her. On Friday afternoon, after flying down from Scotland, the Queen and Prince Philip finally made their much-anticipated appearance among the grieving crowds. A momentary expression of anxiety flashed across her face, betraying her uncertainty as to how her people would react. "We were not confident," a former courtier stated, "that when the Queen got out of her car, she would not be hissed and jeered." The thing is, I think the reputation of the Queen is so strong and her position and her role, and the fact that she's an elder as well, I mean, she's the grandmother of the country, I think people have enough respect. And also at that time, given that there was such a tragic, such a big tragedy, I think people have enough respect not to have hissed at the Queen, for God's sakes. But as soon as she walked among her people, the ugly atmosphere evaporated and the crowds erupted in spontaneous, if polite, applause. When an 11-year-old girl held out a bouquet of red roses, the Queen asked, "Would you like me to place them for you?" I remember this story. Let's pause for a moment there. The Queen goes to a little girl, takes her flowers and says, "Would you like me to place them for you?" Meaning, I'm not going to hand these over to a courtier. Would you like me to go and put these flowers down with all the other flowers for Princess Diana? That's the Queen of England, okay? That is her heart in a spontaneous, unplanned moment. That is the Queen. That is who she is. That is who Elizabeth Lilibet is, okay? The girl replied, "No, Your Majesty, they're for you." Such a beautiful moment. Back in the palace, the Queen and her husband spent a long time talking about the public mood and what was on the people's minds. The royal couple barely were able to process what was going on. It was like entering another world. As a senior aide explained, at Balmoral, she hadn't taken it in. So I can imagine, you're there, you're secluded, you're isolated, you don't know what's going on. You don't know the feeling. You can see the pictures, but when you get there, it's ridiculous. I remember seeing it on the news, seeing the pictures, but when you are there, it's ridiculous. And also, I've seen the Queen, okay, and I know that feeling of that crowd when she got out of that car and started walking around. When you see the Queen, there is a glow around her. I can't even describe it. I don't know whether it's her or whether it's me, but there is some angel-like glow. It's really weird, and you are literally just, your breath is taken away. So I can imagine all that crowd, when she stepped out, they just stopped, and then they were like, applauding, as this book says, because you just can't believe it. You can't believe it. I don't know if you've ever been to the Taj Mahal in India, but it's the same thing. I think it's because you see it so much, and then when you get there, you see it so much in pictures and whatever, and when you get there, it's like grand. It's so much more grand. It's so much more majestic. It's unbelievably beautiful. This massive marble thing that symbolizes love. Like, it's incredible, and literally you just burst out crying because it's so overwhelming. And so that's what it's like when you see the Queen. Sorry, back to the Queen's reaction. So what I'm trying to say is that obviously when she was in Balmoral, people are saying things to you, you've got all the aides in the world, you're seeing things in the news, you're reading the newspaper, but you don't feel that atmosphere until you are standing with those thousands of people, with the thousands of flowers, with the silence, with the grief, with people crying, people wailing. You don't really realise it until you're there. So I'm not surprised that she hadn't taken it in. You never know. I hadn't taken it in until obviously she got to London. You never know what it is like until you're actually there. Well, there we are. There we are. I should say I'm reading this in real time. So there are bits that I read ahead, but most of it I'm reading in real time. So I'm reading with you. So these are my views, and they do seem to come out in the book. But I'm not. I haven't read the whole chapter, and then now I'm just like saying all of my views coming out from what's next in the sentence. I actually don't know what's next in the sentence. So you know, obviously my view is right, I suppose, as opposed to according to Andrew Morton. So yeah, so you never know what it's like until you're actually there. All the remarks and people hugging each other, sobbing, the whole nation seemed to have gone bananas. The Queen and Prince Philip felt utterly bewildered. They would have understood the nation mood more keenly had they been in London at Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle when this tragedy occurred. It was their fortune or misfortune, depending on the perspective, that they were staying in Balmoral several hundred miles away. Nor did they fully appreciate, along with many others, the impact of Diana's death on the national psyche. The world has lost the plot, wrote commentator Giles Brandreth at the time. Yet for the public, who had keenly watched the upward trajectory of Diana's life, it was sadness of her death that was so difficult to bear. It was an unequal end to everything that had gone before her in her life. The Queen and her family did not see what the public saw. They mourned someone who they all knew, the family lamenting the flawed individual rather than the saintly icon. Years later, Harry discussed his own confusion. He heard people sobbing when he couldn't bring himself to cry for his late mother. His father felt a similar sense of bafflement, the Prince of Wales recalling, "I felt an alien in my own country." So I'm going to end it there, guys. I'm finding this just increasingly interesting. I don't know about you. I hope you're enjoying this. You know, I mean, I'm reading it, and so I just thought I'd share it with you. So I really do hope you're enjoying this, and I'm so sorry if you're not. I hope you are. But we got to the point now where the Queen is about to do her televised address, and she's going to do a speech about Princess Diana, and this, I understand, is unprecedented. So we've got to that part. So please do join me in my next video, which will be part 3. I'm so sorry this has taken so long, and I don't want to do a really long video, so I'm trying to keep them bearable, on a bearable length. So please do join me in my next video. If you haven't listened to my first video, please do. This is the second part, and I will try and upload the third part as soon as I can. And please do subscribe to my channel. So take care, guys. Bye.